Today we continue our walking tour of Moscow's parks with the park on Poklonny Hill. It's one of Russia's largest memorial parks, commemorating the people's struggle for the freedom of the fatherland. The history of Poklonny Hill is inextricably linked to the history of Russia and Moscow. At the end of the 16th century, the Crimean Khan Hachik set up his camp here. Later, Polish-Lithuanian invaders came here on several occasions. Napoleon himself stood here on a September morning in 1812, awaiting the keys to Moscow. Unfortunately, the hill has hardly been preserved. Most of it was destroyed during the renovation of Mozhaysky Chaussee, the construction of Kutuzovsky Prospect and the formation of Victory Square in the late 1950s and early 1960s. Parts of the hill was artificially leveled during the Memorial Park's construction in the 1980s, and this memorial cross was erected here in the 1990s. The idea to create this monument originated as early as 1945, but the contest to design it only began in 1957, when Moscow's Executive Council for Construction and the Ministry of Culture of the USSR decided to build a large memorial park on Poklonny Hill. And on the 23rd of February 1958, Marshals Konev, Sokolovsky, Malinovsky, Vyshinin and Budony solemnly unveiled the foundation stone of the site of what was to become the memorial park. That day marked the beginning of the long and painful story to build a great memorial on Poklonny Hill. The history of the park's creation is well described in the memoirs of Viktor Grishin, the first secretary of Moscow's party committee. He recalls how Lev Rudnev created a gorgeous design in the early 1950s. But a fight over architectural excesses broke out. The designs were changed several times. They were on display in both Gorky Park and the Moscow House of Artists, but all of them were criticized. Architects and sculptors struggled to find an appropriate solution. Finally, a design by Anatoly Polansky, Mikhail Posokhin and Vladimir Bogdanov was chosen. Meanwhile, all the sculptures were made by Nikolai Tomsky. But when they finally began implementing the project in 1984, perestroika began. The project was actively rediscussed and criticized all over again. In the end, construction was halted. Viktor Grishin recalls in his memoirs that 45 million had been spent on building the complex, and it was 86% finished. The square in front of it was paved and fountains were built, but all of this was put on hold for almost 9 years. They finally decided to finish the project for the 50th anniversary of the victory in the Second World War. In fact, neither Tomsky nor Belopolsky lived to see that day. As a result, the building was completed based on an amendment design. A bronze dome replaced the golden one. And new sculpture groups made by Zurab Tseretelli appeared on the front facade of the building. The solemn opening ceremony took place on the 9th of May, 1995. Sculptor Nikolai Tomsky planned to erect a giant statue of a soldier waving a red banner, but the poet Andrei Voznesensky criticized the monument and compared it to a big X. Only in the early 1990s was the sculptor Zurab Tseretelli able to design a new monument, a tall stele in the form of Nike. The stele is 148.8 meters high, symbolizing the 1,418 days of the war. Muscovites criticized this monument too, but time eventually smoothed things over. Initially, the monument, the tragedy of the people's sacrifice, was installed here, but it was later moved behind the main museum building. In 2014, on the 100th anniversary of the First World War, a new monument was unveiled here. In the 1980s, they intended to erect an enormous monument to fallen soldiers here. But in the early 1990s, the decision was made to build a cathedral in the name of St. George the Victorious instead. Architect Anatoly Polansky built an Orthodox cathedral with an interesting and original design for the early 1990s, and it was solemnly consecrated and opened by Patriarch Alexei II in May 1995. Over the past 25 years, many monuments dedicated to various Russian soldiers and heroes have been erected within the park's grounds. In the mid-1990s, a space devoted to the Navy was opened during the construction of the complex, where visitors can see pieces of armaments from the Second World War era. The largest exhibit here is this railway artillery mount. It arrived in 1999 and was originally manufactured in 1936 by the Obukhovsky plant in Leningrad. As you stroll around the Memorial Park, don't forget to visit the Museum of the Great Patriotic War. And I'll see you soon on my next video tour.